Thomas Woodrow Wilson was born in Virginia in 1858. He attended Davidson College, Princeton University, University of Virginia Law School, and Johns Hopkins University, where he received his doctoral degree. In 1902, Wilson became the president of Princeton University, where he impressed many people with his wisdom and leadership skills. He was inspired by his colleagues to run for governor of New Jersey and was elected into office in 1910. He was then encouraged to run for the 28th President of the United States in the 1912 election, which was between Taft, Roosevelt, and Wilson. He ran on a campaign platform he named New Freedom, where he sought to make democracy safe and present for all. In his second term, Wilson suffered from a stroke that nearly killed him. He served as president from 1913 through 1921 and died in 1924. Up next, Chief Legislator. A role of the President of the United States is to voice his own opinion and ideas to Congress while they draft legislation. These speeches promote the President's agenda and frame Congress's work. From 1913 through 1917, the government was unified. During this time period, much of Wilson's desired legislation was passed, and he was able to steamroll over opposition. However, the government soon became divided when the Republicans gained the majority of seats in 1917 and continued to grow in seats until 1921. In Wilson's New Freedom platform, he promised the American people that he would bring them true democracy and attack the triple wall of privilege, the tariff, the banks, and the trust. While in office, Wilson and Congress passed much legislation reflective and upholding Wilson's campaign promises. The Federal Reserve Act brought a central system of banking to the U.S. and brought economic stability. The previous banking system pinched small farmers and entrepreneurs. The gold standard made currency too tight, and loans were too expensive for the average American. However, the Federal Reserve Act brought flexibility in currency. The Federal Trade Commission Act contained many elements. Among it was prevention of monopolies and deceptive business activities, consumer protection, and approval of government investigations over business. The Clayton Antitrust Act prohibited exclusive sales contracts, local price cutting to freeze out competitors, rebates, legalized peaceful strikes, and more. Through the Adamson Act and Keating-Owen Act, it was clear he was an advocate for better work conditions and human rights. All presidents prior to Wilson would submit a written State of the Union address to Congress. However, Wilson set a precedent that all future presidents followed, verbally delivering the State of the Union address before Congress. Despite the drop-off in helping create legislation later in his presidency due to his illness, Wilson receives an A. Are you ready for Chief Executive? The responsibility of the president is to execute and enforce the laws of the land. He oversees the bureaucratic agencies that help him enforce the law. Under the presidency of Wilson, a change in government became apparent. The separation of powers of the government looked less like a layer cake and more like a marble cake. And who doesn't love cake? Wilson and Congress worked hand in hand on bills. Wilson surrounded himself with a strong, powerful, and intelligent group of advisors to help him fulfill his duties. Wilson worked closely with his cabinet officers and gave them considerable freedom and initiative. He held weekly cabinet meetings where his team of advisors would come to a common consensus on critical issues. Wilson receives an A for Chief Executive, as he was able to pass legislation he desired. He passionately executed them. Also, with a team of advisors, he was able to keep a firm eye on all of the bureaucratic responsibilities. Chief of Party. The role of the Chief of Party is to help members of the same political party get elected or appointed into office. Despite bringing dominance back to the Democratic Party by being the first strong Democratic candidate for years, Wilson was an unsuccessful Chief of Party. In the start of his presidency, the government was unified. However, as his term went on, the government was divided and Democrats lost many seats in Congress. This decrease was significant. In 1913, the Democrats had 291 seats in Congress. In 1921, the Democrats had 192 seats in Congress. So they declined. We believe that Wilson receives a C due to his lack of fulfilling the Chief of Party role. Sorry, Wilson. Commander-in-Chief. The President functions as the Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Armed Forces. All military leaders report to and take orders from the president. On April 2, 1917, Wilson ended neutrality in World War I by asking Congress to declare war on Germany, stating, "The world must be made safe for democracy." This decision was motivated by the German Navy's use of submarines in unrestricted warfare against U.S. merchant ships and the Zimmermann telegraph. Before World War I, Wilson had proposed a program of military preparedness. This helped the U.S. Navy move quickly to aid the British fleet in combating the threat of German submarines after the U.S. entered the conflict. The Selected Service Act managed the induction of 2.8 million men into the armed forces over the 2-year span of the U.S. involvement in World War I. President Wilson gave General John J. Pershing significant authority of the United States Armed Forces in Western Europe, including control of tactics, strategy, and some diplomatic relations during the war. For responding to the threats posed to the nation by Germany during World War I and greatly expanding the size and strength of the U.S. Army during this time period, Woodrow Wilson receives an A in fulfilling his role as Commander-in-Chief. And now, Chief Diplomat. Being a diplomat involves interacting with leaders from other nations. The president takes the lead in foreign relations by associating with foreign leaders and negotiating treaties that are approved by the Senate. President Woodrow Wilson initially took a position of neutrality for the United States after World War I broke out in Europe in 1914. After declaring war in 1915, Wilson used his greatly expanded international authority in peace talks. He outlined his goal in 14 points, delivered to Congress on January 1918. He called for a new diplomacy consisting of open covenants openly arrived at. Wilson aimed to prevent future wars by means of a new international organization, a League of Nations, in which all democratic states would participate. Wilson believed that this league would transform international relations and usher in a new era of world peace. At the Paris Peace Conference, Wilson was forced to compromise on most of his points. Despite most of his points being rejected, Wilson was hopeful that a strong League of Nations could help prevent future wars. He returned to present the Treaty of Versailles to the Senate. The treaty was met with stiff opposition at home by isolationists who feared it would lead to permanent global involvement. President Wilson played an integral role in foreign affairs after World War I and expanded the president's role as chief diplomat. Despite his activism, much of his diplomatic goals were rejected by the Allied powers as well as Congress. Shocker there. For this reason, he will be given a B for his role as chief diplomat. Guardian of the Galaxy. In this role, the president is concerned with such things such as unemployment, high prices, taxes, business profits, and the general prosperity of the country. The president does not control the economy, but is expected to help it run smoothly. His main focus. During his first term, President Woodrow Wilson saw many economic reforms. Between the Clayton Antitrust Act and the Federal Trade Commission, Wilson terminated unfair business activities, held individual officers and corporations responsible for acting ethically, and created a clear set of guidelines that corporations had to follow to ensure legal business practices. These laws were stronger than any antitrust legislation before. Wilson also supported the United States Revenue Act of 1913, which reimposed the federal income tax following the ratification of the 16th Amendment. Within a few years after the Revenue Act was implemented, federal income tax replaced tariffs as the chief source of revenue for the government. Additionally, it lowered basic tariff rates from 40% to 25%, the lowest they had been since 1857. It taxed goods based in proportion to value, and some industrial and agricultural materials had a 0% tax rate. President Wilson receives an A in performing his role as guardian of the economy for bringing more economic stability to the United States. Chief of State. The role of Chief of State is to represent the United States at public events. This is a ceremonial role. Wilson was the first president to travel internationally to Europe and other foreign lands during his presidency. There, Wilson represented the United States through foreign affairs. His international travel aided him in the creation of the League of Nations. However, Wilson did not make many ceremonial appearances to the public. Later presidents, such as FDR and Coolidge, used the radio to reach out to people and keep in touch. Today, presidents use TV. Internationally, Wilson receives an A for representing the United States in foreign lands, but a C domestically. Comparatively speaking, President Obama often fulfills the role of chief of state. He goes to popular lunch spots where he meets and shakes hands with average citizens. He invited the UConn men's basketball team to the White House after they won the national championship. However, with advanced technology, it makes connecting with people today easier. Chief of teeth? People look up to the president as a model of excellence. Teeth play a very important role in the human body. They tear and grind up food to be swallowed, making it easier for the digestive system to process. Unclean teeth can lead to decayed tooth or gingivitis. Even George Washington had better teeth. Wilson receives an F for chief of teeth role. Overall, President Wilson receives a B- based on the way he fulfilled his presidential responsibilities.